All right, we have two speakers this evening. I would remind both our speakers that by board policy, at this point in the agenda, they have 3 minutes to speak. And there's a timer at the bottom of the screen up here. And at the end of 3 minutes, I will thank them for coming and excuse them from the podium. Our first speaker tonight is Dave Trabert, Kansas Policy Institute. Mr. Trabert.
Try to keep an eye on that clock up there. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to share some facts about the new law authorizing districts to use surplus funds from prior years, also known as unencumbered carryover cash balances, to supplement base state aid by as much as $232 per pupil. For USD 259, that means approximately $16.4 million of prior year surplus funds can be transferred without restriction to effectively increase base state aid. At last report, the district had built up $45 million in the identified funds and $108 million in total operating fund carryover balances. That does not include any capital outlay or bond payments. So the district can, if it chooses, use this option to avoid teacher layoffs and other program cuts. Now, while carryover cash is used to manage cash flow, the fact that these balances have increased significantly over the years as some revenues were not spent shows that the district has the ability to use this option if it chooses and still have a lot of cash left over. Now, many districts are able to operate with far lower balance ratios. In fact, 220 districts statewide manage cash flow with much lower carryover cash balances relative to their operating expenses. And finally, I wanted to mention that while surplus carryover cash is part of the budget process, that doesn't mean that the cash is intended to be spent. The handout provided explains in a little bit greater detail, but obviously the surplus cash hasn't been spent as evidenced by the fact that the balances have increased over the years. Now, whether you choose to exercise this option to avoid teacher layoffs and other program cuts is, of course, your choice. It's how you set your priorities. Like all other taxpayers and employers, you have some very challenging decisions to make. Fortunately, the legislature has provided you with this viable option by authorizing local boards to decide how best to utilize taxpayer dollars collected in prior years that were not spent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lynn?
Mr. Trabert, I do have one question. Tell me what you think about the concept of the federal government spending Social Security trust funds for something other than Social Security benefits.
How does that relate to this issue at hand?
It does a lot because of the ratios that you're talking about. The funds that you're referring to, why our ratios are so high, relate to the fact that they're trust funds that we put aside for employee health care funds. About $45 million of that 108 that you talk about goes to that. So I guess it's a similar concept. If we spent those health care funds on something else, it's similar to what Congress does with Social Security. Well, so are you okay with that, and as well as us spending it for that?
Well, none of the funds that are identified in SB 111 include the special reserve fund that you have set aside for that purpose.
No, but you did talk that we do have, and you say we can spend those kinds of funds as well by not putting money into those funds. And I guess I just want to make sure that people are clear and understand.
Yes, in some funds you can. The funds that are identified in SB 111 5 years ago had a balance of about 31.
No, that's not what I'm asking about. I'm asking what do you think about spending funds for something other than what they were intended for, like Social Security trust funds?
Well, the funds that the surplus buildup that are in the funds, especially identified in SB 111.
No, I'm talking about the trust funds.
I'm talking about the funds that you actually have and are able to use, which represent surplus from prior year.
I'm not talking about surplus, sir. I'm talking about the money that we set aside for the special reserves in particular, and because it's a very similar to concept what the Congress is doing with Social Security. That's just all I'm asking.
But we're not talking about special reserve. We're talking about the balances that are in SB 111 funds, which do not include that fund.
Okay. But you did refer to them in the $108 million. Did you not?
That's included in the total.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And you're saying that we can use those funds as well by not putting money into those. So if you don't want to answer the question, then that's okay.
That's not true. The balances in those funds can be used, as all funds are used, to manage cash flow. It can be used for that. Mm-hmm. To answer the specific question about your special reserve fund and how you allocate the money to that, I'd have to look at the audit reports and how you make those decisions, what should be in there. That's probably a good idea. I think we should look at that.
And I would encourage you to do that. Thank you.
We will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.